Kimi K3, GPT-5.6 Sol, or Gemini 3.6. Which one actually writes better code? I put all three through 5 head-to-head tests, kept a running scoreboard, and I'll tell you exactly which type of coder belongs on each one. One of these three wins almost every raw coding test, and it's not the one that wins the most points overall. Test 1 covers cost. Picking the price your model for an agent running all day adds up fast. Gemini 3.6 charges $1.50 per million input tokens and $7.50 per million output tokens. Kimi K3 charges $3 for input and $15 for output. GPT 5.6 Sol charges $5 for input and $30 for output. Run the same job, 10 million input tokens and 2 million output tokens, and Gemini lands at $30 total. Kimi K3 lands at $60 and GPT 5.6 Sol lands at $110. Price alone doesn't tell you whether a model can actually do the job, and that's exactly what the next test settles. Gemini 3.6 wins this test. That puts Gemini 3.6 at 1 point, Kimi K3 at 0, and GPT 5.6 Sol at 0. If you've used all three of these, drop a comment with which one has been the most consistent for you, because real workflows can expose things benchmarks miss. My name is Brian, and I spend most of my week digging through AI products, benchmarks, APIs, and pricing pages to figure out where these tools actually differ. Test 2 is where things get complicated for the model that just took an early lead. Test 2 covers coding benchmark performance, the test that actually answers what this video is asking. On Terminal Bench 2.1, GPT 5.6 Sol scores 88.8%, just ahead of Kimi K3's vendor-reported 88.3, though an independent run put Kimi closer to 80.9. On Deep SWE, which measures long-horizon software engineering work, GPT 5.6 Sol leads clearly at 73% against Kimi K3's vendor-reported 67.5 and Gemini 3.6's 49. One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. On the front-end code arena, Kimi K3 takes the top spot worldwide at an ELO of 1679, ahead of GPT 5.6 Sol at 1618 and Gemini 3.6 at 1537. And the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index puts GPT 5.6 Sol out front at 58.9, Kimi K3 at 57, and Gemini 3.6 trailing at 50. The deep SWE gap matters on any long coding job, and the terminal bench gap is close enough to call a near tie once you discount Kimi's disputed number. Still, a front-end heavy shop has real reason to look past the overall gap because of Kimi K3's arena win. GPT 5.6 Sol wins this test. That puts Gemini 3.6 at 1 point, Kimi K3 at 0, and GPT 5.6 Sol at 1. But that answer only matters if you can wait for it. Next up is speed. On raw throughput, Gemini 3.6 puts out 304 tokens a second. GPT 5.6 Sol runs around 61.7 and Kimi K3 runs around 40.8. On time to first token, Kimi K3 answers in about 3 seconds and Gemini 3.6 takes 12 to 15. GPT 5.6 Sol at max reasoning can take up to 154 seconds of hidden thinking before it says a word. These numbers weren't measured under identical settings, so treat the ranking as directional. Still, in a pipeline firing hundreds of calls a day, Gemini's throughput adds up to real time saved, while Kimi's quick first response feels snappier in a single back and forth. Gemini 3.6 wins this test on throughput. That puts Gemini 3.6 at 2 points, Kimi K3 at 0, and GPT 5.6 Sol at 1, Gemini's tied the coding leader on points, and the next test decides who can hold the most work in memory. Stick with me, because the last 4 tests are where this decision actually flips. Test 4 covers context and output limits. A model that cuts off its answer before finishing a job forces you to split it manually and prompt again. The real gap is in max output. Kimi K3 can hand back up to 1 million tokens in a single request. GPT-5.6 Sol caps out at 128,000, and Gemini 3.6 caps out at about 65,000. That means Kimi K3 can return an entire generated module in one pass, while Gemini's answers get cut short on bigger jobs and need to be chained together. Kimi K3 wins this test. That puts Gemini 3.6 at 2 points, Kimi K3 at 1, and GPT 5.6 Sol at 1. Kimi's on the board now, and the last test decides who you'd actually commit to long term. There is a real caveat on context and output limits worth naming before we score it. All 3 sit near the same 1 million token context window, so that number barely separates them. The final test covers deployment and modality. A closed, text-only model can force an unplanned switch later. Kimi K3 has open weights promised, though not yet shipped, so that edge is still a bet on a future date rather than a shipped download. It remains the only one of these 3 with any real self-host path. GPT 5.6, Sol, and Gemini 3.6 are both fully closed and API only. On modality, Gemini 3.6 accepts text, image, video, audio, and PDF input, the widest range of the 3, while Kimi K3 handles text plus native video, and GPT 5.6 Sol sticks to text and image only. This one comes down to a tie between Kimi K3 and Gemini 3.6, since each wins a different half of this test, and GPT 5.6 Sol doesn't lead either one. That puts Gemini 3.6 at 3 points, Kimi K3 at 2, and GPT 5.6 Sol at 1. Gemini takes the scoreboard lead, but that was never the same question as which model actually writes better code. So, Kimi K3 won context and output limits and split the deployment test, but its headline benchmark numbers are vendor reported, and the terminal bench one doesn't hold up once you check it against an independent run. GPT 5.6 Sol won the one test that actually answers this video's question, coding benchmark performance, but it costs the most by a wide margin and can leave you waiting over 2 minutes at max reasoning. Gemini 3.6 won cost and speed outright and split deployment, but it's clearly behind on every real coding benchmark in this comparison. Kimi K3 won context and output limits and split the deployment test, but its headline benchmark numbers are vendor reported, and the terminal bench one doesn't hold up once you check it against an independent run. GPT 5.6 Sol won the one test that actually answers this video's question, coding benchmark performance, but it costs the most by a wide margin and can leave you waiting over 2 minutes at max reasoning. Gemini 3.6 won cost and speed outright and split deployment, but it's clearly behind on every real coding benchmark in this comparison. So, Kimi K3 won context and output limits and split the deployment test, but its headline benchmark numbers are vendor reported, and the terminal bench one doesn't hold up once you check it against an independent run. GPT 5.6 Sol won the one test that actually answers this video's question, coding benchmark performance, but it costs the most by a wide margin and can leave you waiting over 2 minutes at max reasoning. Gemini 3.6 won cost and speed outright and split deployment, but it's clearly behind on every real coding benchmark in this comparison. So, if you want the strongest raw coding output and can absorb the cost and the weight, GPT 5.6 Sol is your default. If price and speed matter more than squeezing out the last bit of coding quality, Gemini 3.6 is worth choosing. If you need long, large output agentic work and want the option to self-host down the line, Kimi K3 is your lane. Given zero extra context, I'd start with GPT 5.6 Sol. The decisive reason is that this video set out to answer one specific question: which one writes better code? GPT 5.6 Sol is the only one of the 3 that actually leads the coding-specific tests, even though it lost the overall scoreboard to a cheaper, faster rival. One thing nobody talks about is that Kimi K3's vendor-reported terminal bench score of 88.3 doesn't match the independently measured 80.9. Its deep SWE score of 67.5 is vendor-reported too, with no independent figure to check it against. That gap is worth remembering every time Kimi K3 posts a headline number, at least until independent testing catches up to the vendor's claims. So, Kimi K3's win on the front-end code arena didn't get the spotlight it deserved here, and that's really its own video. If you build mostly front-end interfaces, the next comparison to watch is the one that puts these same 3 models through front-end specific coding tests only, because that's where this ranking flips completely.